ultimate result of the brush with the pirates on the lagoon was that it made Tiger Lily their friends.
Peter had saved Tiger Lily from a dreadful fate.
And now there was nothing she would not do for him.
All night they sat above, keeping watch over their home under the ground and awaiting the big attack by the pirates, which obviously could not be much longer delayed.
We have now reached the evening that was to be known among them as the Night of Nights.
The day
had been quietly gathering its forces,
had been almost uneventful.
And now Tiger Lily's tribe in their blanket were at the posts above,
while below the children were having their evening meal.
All except Peter, who had gone out to get the time.
The way you got the time on the island was to find the crocodile and then stay near him till the clock struck.
The meal happened to be a make-believe tea, and they sat around the board, guzzling in their greed.
And really, what with their chatter and recriminations, the noise
was positively deafening.
To be sure, she did not mind noise, but she simply would not have them grabbing things, then excusing themselves by saying that Tootles had pushed their elbow.
There was a fixed rule that they must never hit back at meals, but should refer the matter of the dispute to Wendy, while raising the right arm politely and saying,
"I complain of so-and-so."
But what usually happened was that they forgot to do this.
Or did it too much.
"Silence!"
cried Wendy, when for the 20th time she had told them that they were not all to speak at once.
"Is your mug empty slightly, darling?"
"Not quite empty, Mummy."
"He hasn't even begun to drink his milk."
This was telling, and slightly seized his chance.
"I complain of Nibs."
John, however, had held up his hand first.
"Well, John?"
"May I sit in Peter's chair, as he is not here?"
"Sit in Father's chair, John."
Wendy was scandalised.
"Certainly not."
"He's not really our father. He didn't even know what a father does till I showed him."
Tootles held up his hand. He was so much the humblest of them, indeed he was the only humble one, that Wendy was specially gentle with him.
I don't suppose that I could be father."
"No, Tootles."
Once Tootles began, which was not very often, he had a silly way of going on.
"As I can't be father, I don't suppose, Michael, you'd let me be baby?"
"No, I won't."
"As there can't be anything important, would any of you like to see me do a trick?"
No.
No.
Then at last he stopped.
I hadn't really any hope.
The hateful telling broke out again.
"Slightly is coughing on the table."
"Curly is taking both butter and honey."
"Nibs is speaking with his mouth full."
"I complain of Curly."
"I complain of Nibs."
Oh dear, I'm sure I sometimes think that spinsters are to be envied."
She told them to clear away and sat down to her work basket, a heavy load of stockings and every knee with a hole in it as usual.
"Wendy, I'm too big for a cradle."
"I must have somebody in a cradle, and you are the littlest. A cradle is such a nice homely thing to have about a house."
While she sewed, they played games around her, such a group of happy faces and dancing limbs lit up by that romantic fire. It had become a very familiar scene, this home under the ground.
But we are looking on it for the last time.
There was a step above, and Wendy, you may be sure, was the first to recognise it.
"Children, I hear your father's step. He likes you to meet him at the door."
And then, as so often before, the happy children dragged him from his tree.
He bought nuts for the boys and the correct time for Wendy.
"Peter, you just spoil them, you know."
"Ah, old lady."
"It was me told him mothers are called old lady."
"I complain of Michael." "Father, we want to dance."
"Dance away, my little man."
"But we want you to dance."
Peter was really the best dancer among them, but he pretended to be scandalised.
Me? My old bones would rattle.
And Mummy too.
Oh, what? The mother of such an armful? Dance?
Oh, but on a Saturday night.
It was not really Saturday night, at least it may have been.
For they had long lost count of the days.
But always, if they wanted to do anything special, they said this was Saturday night, and they did it.
Of course it is Saturday night, Peter.
People of our figure, Wendy.
But it is only among our own children.
True, true.
So they were told they could dance, but they must put on their nighties first.
Ah, old lady.
Peter was warming himself by the fire and looking down at Wendy as she sat turning a heel.
There is nothing more pleasant of an evening for you and me when the day's toil is over than to rest by the fire with the little ones nearby.
It is sweet, isn't it, Peter? Peter, I think Curly has your nose.
Michael takes after you.
She went to him and put her hand on his shoulder.
Dear Peter, with such a large family, of course, I have now passed my best. But you don't want to exchange me, do you?
No, Wendy.
Oh, certainly he did not want to change, but he looked at her uncomfortably, blinking.
You know, like one not sure whether he was awake or asleep.
Peter, what is it?
Oh, I was just thinking, it is only make-believe, isn't it, that I'm their father?
Oh, yes.
You see, it would make me seem so old to be their real father.
But they are ours, Peter, yours and mine.
But not really, Wendy.
Not if you don't wish it.
And she distinctly heard his sigh of relief.
Peter, what are your exact feelings to me?
Those of a devoted son, Wendy.
I thought so.
She went and sat by herself at the extreme end of the room.
You are so queer. Tiger Lily is just the same. There is something she wants to be to me, but she says it's not my mother.
No, indeed it is not.
Wendy replied with frightful emphasis.
Now we know why she was prejudiced against Tiger Lily.
Well, then what is it?
It isn't for a lady to tell.
Oh, very well. Perhaps Tinkerbell will tell me.
Oh, yes, Tinkerbell will tell you. She is an abandoned little creature.
Here, Tink,
Who was in her bedroom eavesdropping.
squeaked out something impudent.
She says she glories in being abandoned.
He had a sudden idea.
Oh, perhaps Tink wants to be my mother.
Tinker Bell called him a silly ass in a passion.
She said it so that Wendy needed no translation.
I almost agree with her.
Wendy snapped.
Fancy Wendy snapping.
But she had been much tried, and she little knew what was to happen before the night was out. If she had known, she would not have snapped.
None of them knew.
Perhaps it was best not to know.
Their ignorance gave them one more glad hour.
They sang and danced in their nightgowns.
Such a deliciously creepy song it was, in which they pretended to be frightened of their own shadows, little witting that so soon shadows would close in upon them from whom they would shrink in real fear.
The stories they told before it was time for Wendy's good night story.
And then at last they all got into bed for Wendy's story, the story they loved best.
The story Peter hated.